know it's funny how life turns out. I was planning an introduction for the next episode of the Jimquisition, shortly after I posted the last one, Mankind Derided, where I was going to address some of the people who were basically wanting me to shut up about microtransactions as usual, because they're personally not affected and they don't think it does any harm to have fee-to-pay elements. And I was going to point out that I'm still driven to do it, and I still feel vindicated because I know, out there, in the bowels of the corporate machine, there are developers watching this show thinking, you know what, he's right, and he's saying things I'm not allowed to say. And I know that's true because I've had developers over the years pretty much tell me that exact same thing. So it's always a special vindicating, I feel validated and justified continuing this and speaking for people who aren't allowed to speak for fear of losing their jobs. And the extra irony this time was that while I was planning this, I got a message from someone who was involved with the development of Mankind Divided itself, and they had some very, very interesting things to say. So consider this a follow-up to Mankind Derided as we talk about exactly how and why Square Enix couldn't stop fucking with Deus Ex Mankind Divided. On the last episode, we talked about the pre-order fuckery and microtransactions that had been snuck into Deus Ex Mankind Divided. In the episode, I mentioned how I for once believed the developer when Eidos Montreal had said the game wasn't balanced with microtransactions in mind. I theorised that Square Enix had instead bolted the fee-to-pay bullshit onto an already made game for no other reason than greed. According to at least one developer at Eidos Montreal, that's exactly how it went down. Now, before we continue, I must of course stress that due to the anonymity of my source, I cannot responsibly explicitly present the following as confirmed factual news. However, I can tell you that I know the developer I spoke to, I personally pored over and corroborated their credentials, and I went through a rigorous confirmation process, including having my source take a selfie of themselves mimicking this boglin's face to prove they were the person they were claiming to be. I'm not kidding, they did an amazing job, and I wish I could show you, but anonymity, etc. Everything I've learned about this developer's experience, some of which I can't even tell you, lines up with what other sources have told me before, and the long and the short of it is that I trust and believe in the juicy goss I'm about to share. So, as I said, Square Enix did indeed make the decision to put the microtransactions into Deus Ex's single-player story mode, adding bullshit freemium-style purchases including credits and praxis kits to a game that was not designed for their appearance. The real kicker? Eidos Montreal had no idea the microtransactions were planned for the game while they were making it. It was only after the bulk of it had been developed that they suddenly got word from Square Enix's London office telling them they had extra work to do. As my source tells it, they were a mere 2 weeks from submitting the game for approval. They were working on bug fixes and technical details, trying to actually tighten the strings on an already done game by the time the powers that be just sprung it on them. The microtransactions were a last-minute decision that took Eidos by surprise, and despite protests from some staff who were working on actual important shit like, you know, the overall game's quality, there was nothing that could be done. My source theorises that the reason the microtransactions were greyed out and inaccessible to reviewers might not have been a shady attempt to hide them. The decision to include microtransactions was so sudden and down to the wire that there's a chance they simply weren't implemented until just before launch. As a long-time critic of microtransactions in premium games, I find this information both enlightening and vindicating. For those who say microtransactions are simply optional and don't affect the game in any way, here we can see some behind-the-scenes costs. I can't imagine the added stress of having to implement a fucking cash shop a fortnight before submission, while you're still trying to fix crucial technical details about the game. To have made a game well balanced for solo players, and then be told you've got to put that undermining shit into it, well, I'm sure you can imagine why some developers might want that information out there rather than bite their tongue and let it go unheralded. This falls perfectly in line with what we heard about Square Enix in a previous episode way back in January, where another source of mine talked about how scattershot and unpredictable the publisher can be to work for, making sudden last-minute changes to games like Just Cause 3, irrationally chopping games up into episodic parts to chase market trends, and generally panicking constantly over the slightest bump in the fucking road. Speaking of that last episode, do you remember when I mentioned that Deus Ex Mankind Divided was originally going to be a bigger game, but the publisher mandated it be split so there'd be a trilogy of games games instead? Well, while my source could not corroborate that much, they could tell me some very interesting related news. Eidos Montreal had two teams working on Deus Ex, DXNG and DXNG2. DXNG is Square Enix's codename for Mankind Divided, standing for Deus Ex Next Gen. DXNG2, which has been a project since at least mid-2015, is working on the sequel to Mankind Divided, though Square had pulled a number of team members from DXNG2 to DXNG to try and get Mankind Divided released by February 2016. They were a little late on that one, huh? This doesn't prove, or disprove indeed, that the recent Deus Ex was intended to be a larger game and subsequently split up, but it does point to at least two Deus Ex games being developed simultaneously, with work on Mankind Divided sequel having begun quite some time ago. Take that for what you will. When I asked my source about Breach, the rubbish free-to-play style mode shoehorned into Mankind Divided, the response I got was, "Don't get me started." A seeming sore point for at least one dev in Montreal, Breach was indeed tacked on and designed entirely to mimic a free-to-play game as I suggested. I was told that it doesn't just feel like a free-to-play game. By design, it is a free-to-play game hiding inside a full-price title. Breach was shoveled in at Square Enix's behest by what they call the Live team, a team that was allegedly given very little support, but nonetheless got micromanaged and harassed by higher-ups to a far greater degree than even the team working on the actual campaign mode, something priorities. The reason stated by Square for including Breach was, if you followed my work on them before, a classically Square reason. It was included for fear of the main campaign getting too stale for players. Yes, the publisher was worried that people who bought Deus Ex to play Deus Ex would be bored playing Deus Ex and needed something like Breach mode to remain engaged. The inclusion of a shitty little free-to-play game, based on the campaign's dullest moment, was the publisher's way of adding some flavour to the product, as if the company ever needed to sound more out of fucking touch. And now, some other factoids about Deus Ex Mankind Divided's development that are just good to know. The marketing department blew 50,000 Canadian dollars on DXTV, a video series that barely anybody cared about, though apparently the guy who came up with the idea was promoted. DXTV was a thing I had to look up after being told about it. That's how worth it that 50 grand was. Also, my cat appears to have been trapped in a bedroom somewhere, that's why she's whining through a door. I'm going to go and sort that out. That's not a Square Enix fact, that's a Jim fact that's happening. Mankind Divided itself took 5.5 years to develop with an egregious fucking budget of 70 million Canadian dollars. If you've ever wondered why Square Enix has astronomically high sales expectations for its games, to the point where games like Tomb Raider, the last Hitman title, and Sleeping Dogs were famously considered failures after only selling between 1 to 3 million copies apiece. Now you know. Square Enix spends obscene amounts of money on making games and wastes it on frivolous fucking bullshit like tacked-on modes and bagged marketing ideas, all with a high developer turnover. Oh, and as for Mankind Divided, cross your fingers that it sells over 3 million units. That's the minimum it needs in order to break even. They apparently pay the interns at Eidos Montreal some of the lowest wages in the city. That's something else I was told. What else? Ah yes, according to what I've learned, a programmer quite high up was once heard declaring that Square Enix's upper management, and I quote, doesn't give a fuck about games. Apparently Mankind Divided had no internal beta within Square Enix because corporate literally doesn't care. Oh, and Mankind Divided is designed to track your every move if your console or PC is online. Every time you shoot, every item you pick up, your dialogue choices, your system settings, even every time you jump. It's all sent back to Square Enix's servers for analysis. You might not care about that, but like I said on the last episode, it's all very ironic stuff, considering Deus Ex's themes. I've been hearing interesting stuff about Square Enix from multiple sources since 2013, producing 2 episodes, 3 now if we have this one, that paint the image of a company guided by a unique and distasteful combination of fear and greed. It amazes me that it even manages to produce the number of high-quality games it does, as meddling and erratic as it is, and I can only put that down to the talented studios that have rolled with the punches and mostly been able to produce great work in spite of the company's interferences, certainly not because of them. From what I can gather, all of my information is unique to Square Enix's Western contingent, with much of the fuckery's roots tracing back to Square Enix Europe, based in London specifically. How much of this can be applied to Square Enix Japan, I can't say, but it would appear based on what I've seen and heard that it's a completely different ship and not really applicable. Certainly my own official dealings with Square Enix differs when I'm talking about or securing fan code for Western games versus Japanese games. Different PR companies, different chances of them talking to me, just a real dichotomy there. Either way, I think after today's episode there's a very good chance I've kissed a review copy of Final Fantasy XV goodbye. At any rate, Deus Ex Mankind Divided appears to have been a fantastic game through dogged determination, fighting through the obstruction and tampering that I've certainly come to know Square Enix's Western branch for. And the next time someone tells me microtransactions and $60 games really don't matter, I'm going to remember this latest story, because something tells me Eidos Montreal is no anomaly. Fee-to-pay elements are avaricious, unwanted intruders in the game development process that inflict added stress and time on a project, pulling developers away from important duties. That much I'm sure of, and I will have my cast iron proof of that in time. Fuck microtransactions in $60 games, fuck people who tell me to shut up and get over them, and fuck the besuited, rudderless, cretinous executive mountebanks who are shoving them into perfectly fine fucking games. We talked about irony at the beginning of this episode, and there's a little bit more. You see, I was rewatching the episode I did the last time I had a contact tell me stuff about Square Enix, the Why Square Enix is Carving Its Games to Bits episode, and noticed that that episode contains the very first mention of my back injury way back in January. And that's kind of funny that this episode is the first episode after I had that epidural procedure, which at the moment is still taking its time to work. I'm still in quite a bit of pain as I do this, but it's hopefully doing its magic. So I just found that quite funny as well. It's like we had the beginning of it there where I had no idea how bad it was, and here we are with a similar subject, the exact same scenario, the exact same conceit of the episode even, and it's kind of at the concluding area of it. Fingers crossed. So that's just all wrapped up in a neat little package. Like a nice little story. One that doesn't need to be a trilogy. It doesn't need a sequel, is what I'm telling my spine. I need no sequel, please. That would be fine. Thank you. Had enough of that. And thank God, indeed, for me.